Bill Carroll, Zennie62 Media, 32 teams, 32 days. I'm going to have to pick up the pace to get back on track. But most importantly, I want to look at one of the teams that at one point had a distinct advantage at one point in drafting and was one of the best run franchises, not just in football, but in sports. And at one point was the winningest by percentage of all franchises in all major sports. I speak of the Oakland / Los Angeles / Las Vegas Raiders. And at one point, people used to joke, who's the fastest player at their position in the draft? That's who's going to be taken by the Raiders. And frankly, it worked for a while, partially because they were open to taking black athletes when a lot of teams, especially in the NFL, weren't. And the AFL was a little more open to it, but they would play them even at the quote-unquote thinking man's position, while others would not. Al Davis, for whatever his other flaws may have been, was very much an egalitarian in many ways, and really looked for people that saw the Raiders as this separate, distinct thing and bought into their culture. And if you were willing to be a Raider, and that was a lifetime commitment in his mind, then he would back you to the hilt, even if you didn't fit the quote-unquote mold. Obviously, they drafted a first-round black quarterback before most teams would consider signing a black quarterback as an undrafted rookie free agent when they took Eldridge Dickey out of Tennessee A&M, later to become Tennessee State. Unfortunately, they were very patient with him, and he ended up being moved after a very short amount of time to wide receiver, and he wasn't a wide receiver. He was a quarterback and was out of football. But let's talk about this team's composition. And I'm going to go back looking at 2020. Their first pick in 2020 was Henry Ruggs. I won't dwell on this too long. He was not my number one rated receiver, or my number two, or my number three even rated receiver that year. Obviously, with Jerry Jeudy, CeeDee Lamb, and others in that same draft class, I thought it was a little odd to pick Henry Ruggs, and it felt like that was sort of like a beyond the grave pick for Al Davis. Ruggs was extremely dynamic, extremely fast, a tremendously athletic player, but not super productive in college and not super well-rounded. Then they followed that up with, I'm not going to belabor this too much, but the Damon Arnette pick. Even the people I know who really liked Damon Arnette thought of him as like a mid to late third rounder, maybe a late second rounder. I don't know of anybody I ever talked to who had a first round grade on Damon Arnette. They took him with their second first round pick number 19, and I think this is the pick that sort of sealed obviously the Ruggs pick didn't work out, but this is the one that to me sort of sealed it for them as failing in that particular draft, to go back-to-back in the first round, 7 picks apart, and to not get long-term production from either of the two. That's going to be the death knell of many a front office for obvious reasons. And then Lynn Bowden Jr. was the next pick, who, once again, is an interesting sort of gadget kind of player, a poor man's, poor man's Antoine Randall L type kind of. I guess his ceiling would be Randall Cobb. But he's a small, athletic-ish, but not freakishly athletic player who didn't run the full route tree, and it was just a very odd pick. And now he's bounced around a little bit, and I believe he's now on the Dolphins. I think his ceiling, like I said, is a wide receiver 3-4 at most. Then they followed that up with Brian Edwards. So this is pick 81, round 3. A lot of people really liked him, but I still saw a taller Jason Avant, a limited possession receiver type, strong hands, could do a little bit after the catch, but not super dynamic. Couldn't stay healthy, was another thing that worried me about him, and he just never did a lot. And I think he's a guy who's going to hang around the league for a while, but never be really great. This is one of the picks I really liked. So I'm going to first say I really liked the Tanner Muse pick. I thought that was, of their first several picks, that was my favorite pick, was when they got him with their third rounder in pick 100. Sort of a tweener in that, safety, linebacker, weak side linebacker / third safety kind of role. Essentially a sort of a white Taylor Mays, I guess you could say. But I thought if Taylor Mays came along now, people would know what to do with him. Well, once again, he tested really well. Shout out to the ghost of Al Davis. And he's never done really anything in the NFL. It was a bit of a reach, obviously, and his best role is probably as a special teamer. So, so far for the 2020 class. I mean, I don't know how you grade it any higher than a D based on these picks so far. And then we come to John Simpson, powerhouse of a guard. Not a bad player, but not a great player. And I don't know. I mean, there's just a place for him. Some people liked him better than others. I just feel like he's a guy who's really sort of a guy who's pretty good in the run game, but didn't give you much as a pass protector, and I don't think he ever will. So not a great pick there either. Then Amik Robertson. Once again, I liked Amik Robertson. He's once again sort of undersized, but very athletic, productive, unlike many of these other players, very productive in college, and a guy who I still feel in the right situation could be a nickel dime back in the NFL, but never really did a whole lot, where he was. So, yeah, not killing it in that particular class. But yeah, Amik Robertson, was a player that I did like, and I still feel like maybe has potential to be a good player in this league for a while. So let's look at their depth chart circa 2020, then we'll jump to this most recent year. So the Raiders are a team that, clearly has upgraded some positions since then, right? So let's give credit where credit is due. That 2020 depth chart wasn't a bad depth chart. I mean, I think it would be an exaggeration to call it a bad depth chart. But let's take a quick look. At wide receiver, they were trotting out people like Terrell Williams, who was really a wide receiver 3, masquerading as more than that sometimes. The aforementioned Brian Edwards, who never really did anything. Marcel Aitman, who I think may be in the CFL now. Don't quote me. But once again, another possession receiver. And then Keelan Doss, who I actually really liked. A guy who's a smaller school player, kind of guy that you root for when you watch him on Hard Knocks. And then, obviously, Hunter Renfrow, slot receiver extraordinaire. Nelson Aguilar, who really had some of his best tape, if you're watching him as a pro, in his time in Oakland. DeMornay Pearsonell, who is once again, a special teamer more than anything else. Then, obviously, running backs include Josh Jacobs, who is one of those guys that I feel sort of like Larry Brown. The Larry Brown, for those of us who are old enough to remember Larry Brown, was one of the last draft picks of the late, great Vince Lombardi when he was the GM and head coach in Washington. He fell in love with an undersized power back who didn't make a lot of people miss, but was really productive, and even had, I think, a 1,403-yard season, I believe, in a 14-game season once. And, of course, it was never quite the same after that. But Josh Jacobs is a tough, productive, medium-sized, medium-speed back. But you always feel like the next play could be his last a little bit, just because he doesn't have any one special quality, and he's not that big. Jalen Richard, who was a third-down guy, who's got some speed. Lynn Bowden was also listed on the depth chart at running back in those days, along with Devontae Booker. We mentioned Ruggs. Zay Jones, who actually ended up having some good games in his days as a Raider. Rico Gafford, who once again sort of a special teamer, along with Anthony Ratliff-Williams, who was in the USFL and looking pretty good in the USFL for the most part. And then, of course, at tight end, the freak and Darren Waller, who has been very, very good in his career there. Jason Witten, for those who've forgotten, finished out his career as a Raider, as an NFL player, backing up Waller, and then Foster Moreau, who a lot of people liked coming out. I thought he was a tight end too, and that's really what he's proven to be. And the Drew Carrier, small school kid, Beloit, really athletic, undersized, but very athletic. I thought if they could figure out how to use him, he might be productive in sort of that power slot, detached, motion, move tight end, YUH type. And then their offensive line, which is quite an adventure. Colton Miller, who's very athletic, but probably better suited to playing a different position than left tackle. Brandon Parker, who is not athletic enough to play left tackle, backing him up, and then Sam Young, who was a bit of a disappointment, backing both of them up. And then on the right side, Trent Brown, who, to his credit, has exceeded my expectations in his NFL career. David Sharp and Denzel Good. Denzel Good is still a guy I think probably should kick inside and could still have an okay career. But that's where he was in those days. And then at guard, they had, of course, Richie Incognito, who feels very much like a reclamation project. Once again, circa, shout out to Al Davis. But Richie Incognito, then Eric Magnuson, Lester Cotton. Center, Rodney Hudson, who I really liked coming out. Andre James and Jordan Debbie. And then at right guard, they had Gabe Jackson, Eric Cush, who I wanted a small school guy, Division II All-American. John Simpson, who did not have a great career with them. And then Kamal Seymour. Jumping over to their defense, they were trotting out in those days. Well, actually, I guess I should. Yeah, trying out in those days. Well, of course, Cleveland Farrell, another, I won't say wasted pick, but a guy who was drafted way higher than he should have been. Carl Nassib, who later would become a point of inflection in the career of one John Gruden, and then Jeremiah Balaggio, then Maurice Hurst, Jonathan Hankins, and Kendall Vickers at 1D tackle. Malik Collins of the Collins twins, with PJ Hall, I really liked, out of Sam Houston State, backing him up, and Daniel Ross. And then here's one of their best picks of the Gruden Mayock era is Max XX Crosby, backed up by Arden Key, a former, some people projected into the first round at one point, who wasn't that kind of player. Ade Aroma, backing them up. And then Nick Kwiatkowski, Corey Littleton, who was underrated, or was, Nick Morrow, and the starting linebackers backed up by Uchenna Oluego, Markel Lee, Kyle Wilbur, Justin Phillips, Nick Usher, and of course the aforementioned Tanner Muse. And in those days, like at the end of his career, they had one cornerback, and Prince Amukamara, the former Giant first rounder, Damon Arnette, who never really quite became anything, Nevin Lawson, who has hung around, so I think he's a 49er now, but he's hung around the league. Trevon Mullen, Isaiah Johnson, DJ Killings were backing up the other, at Mullen at the other corner spot. LaMarcus Joyner, who's one of the better players on that team as the nickel, along with Amik Robertson, who once again I'm a fan of, and then Demarius Randall, who's probably their best safety, with Eric Harris and Javin White of him, and then John Abram, much ballyhoo because he never stay healthy. Jeff Heath, a really good athlete, and a Saginaw Valley State guy, so one of my Division II players, and then Dalen Levitt backing them up. So they've upgraded several positions. Let's just say right off the bat, obviously wide receiver and offensive line are going to sound a little different. You get Devontae Adams, you can't argue that's an immediate upgrade. Keelan Cole, there you go, back, his second go around. A guy I really like I mentioned, Chris Lacey's behind him, and then Christian Wilkerson, another one of my Division II guys. No, sorry, SEMO. Yeah, SEMO. So FCS guy, but I really liked him. Southeast Missouri. Then Jacoby Myers, who's exceeded my expectations. He's essentially a number 2 receiver, or 3, which is still a little better than I anticipated. Philip Dorsett's fighting it out with DeAndre Carter, Cam Sims, and Trey Tucker. So you've got 3 diminutive speedsters in Carter, who I really fell in love with a little bit when he was at Portland State. No, wait, I'm right. I am right. When he was at Sacramento State. When he was at Sacramento State, and I got to see my guy Garrett Saffron, friend of the show, tossing passes to him. Fell a little bit in love with him, and then Trey Tucker and Philip Dorsett are just old, middle career, and younger versions of kind of the same cat. So maybe they all make it. I don't know. Shout out once again to the late Al Davis, very speedy, and then Cam Sims is in that mix, who's very different kind of receiver, but he's a really good special teamer. So he has I'd say 50-50 shot of making it, and you might see one of those guys end up getting cut. DJ Turner, the college free agent, might make the practice squad. Colton Miller, shout out to him, is still getting it done-ish. Justin Herron's backing him up, who came over from New England. Justin Murray is also in the mix there at left tackle. Center is now Andre James, who was on the team before, but was a backup before to Hudson. Hronis Grasu, who some people really like coming out of Oregon back in the day. They've got Alex Bars, former Chicago Bear. who is starting right guard. I saw his work here in Chicago. I think they may want to still address that position if they can. Natani Muti and Vitaly Gurman are behind him. And then Jermaine Illuminor came over from San Francisco. Brandon Parker still there, backing him up. They have Thayer Mumford, former Ohio State. I won't say great, but standout-ish. And Dalton Wagner is a guy that's a college free agent. Maybe might be a practice squad guy. And then tight end, they've got Austin Hooper, Michael Mayer, who they just drafted, who was my number 2 ranked tight end. Also, O.J. Howard, once again, a lot of people's number 1, not my number 1 tight end coming out his draft year. Jesper Horsted, who, another one of those guys that was a guy I really liked a lot when he was coming out of Princeton. Teams that never quite figured out what to do. Another one, we talked about Derek Carrier, small school, undersized, move tight end. That's what Horsted is. Was essentially a wide receiver at Princeton. Maybe they can figure it out. And then still Josh Jacobs. Amir Abdullah, who's now the third down guy with Brandon Bolden, who will push him for some snaps there. Austin Walter, the sort of downhill, poor man's Josh Jacobs from Stanford. And then Zamir White, who some people really liked coming out. I've never quite understood it. Injury prone, not super productive, so not my cup of tea. But we'll see if he puts it together. There is some talent there. I like Sincere McCormick better, though he's not super flashy. He is a powerful, no-nonsense, one-cut runner, which seems to be what they like here. And they've also got Britton Brown, formerly of UCLA, in the mix. And then looking at their defensive line group. Oh, sorry, they do have a fullback, and only one so far. That's Jacob Johnson, so I guess that job's sewn up. And then Max XX Crosby, of course, is their starting and best defensive player, frankly, but their starting defensive end with Jordan Willis, who I really liked coming out Kansas State, so I think he might find a way to contribute there. Adam Plant's behind him, and then David Agoba. Then they've got Jerry Tillery, who's sort of bounced around a little bit, most recently a Charger. Adam Butler is also in the mix there behind him with Matthew Butler, no relation, and John Jenkins. Then we got Bilal Nichols playing right defensive tackle, former Bear, a guy I really liked back in those days at Delaware State. Then we've also got Neil Farrell Jr., Byron Young, Byron Young, and Jay Nessel-Silvera, who is an interesting Arizona State prospect. If he can get in slightly better condition, and because he plays hard as long as he's able to play hard, I just think he has a shot to be a little better than some people think. Chandler Jones, right? For those who might remember him from his days both in New England and, of course, in Arizona. I guess he's sort of finishing out his career, which is another thing that people sometimes do here with the Raiders. Tyree Wilson is backing him up, at least for the moment. We could see him maybe push to get more starts. Malcolm Kuntz, I really like coming out of Buffalo, who I hope will maybe he and Chandler Jones, Max Crosby, Jordan Willis will maybe join with Tyree in sort of that, dragster, what do we call it, like 5-1-5 package, 5 pass rushers, 1 linebacker to sort of rob and roam in the middle, and then 5 defensive backs. And then moving over to the linebackers, they have Robert Spillane, of course, former Steeler, Darian Butler, Amari Burney, who was part of that most recent draft, who I think is sort of a career backup, and then Drake Thomas also in that mix. It's Kamari Mulga is behind him, or in that mix. And then Dion Diablo, former Virginia Tech Hokie, liked him coming out. Luke Masterson, Curtis Bolton, and Drake Thomas are in the middle linebacker mix. And then Duke Shelley is right now penciled and started at cornerback, along with Brandon Faison, once again another former Hokie, in the mix with Ike Brown and Jordan Perryman. And then at strong safety, you've got Marcus Epps, Trevor Morig, once again a highly touted draft pick. The other free safety with Roderick Teamer and Isaac Puamola and Jaden Grant backing up him at strong. And then behind Morig, you've got Jaquan Johnson and Chris Smith II, who they just drafted out of Georgia. I think Smith is going to push to see the field. Maybe he'll be in that big nickel, in fact, get some snaps. David Long is also starting at cornerback with Amik Robertson still on the team, and also a guy who I think will push for some nickel snaps. And so when they go, once again, go, nickel or even dime, you'll see Amik Robertson along with Nate Hobbs. And they have Sam Webb also in that backup mix with Aziz Hearn. Nickel right now is Nate Hobbs, but Hobbs can play both inside and outside with Tyler Hall, Jacorian Bennett. Watch out for Jacorian Bennett to maybe see some snaps also when they go to like a nickel or dime package. And then Bryce Crosby, who is a guy who might make it as a special teamer, was a college free agent last year. Punter, A.J. Cole, no challenge to him. Daniel Carlson, one of the better place kickers in the NFL, no challenge is being made to him. And then they've got Jacob Beefhomer is their, Baymoyer is their long snapper, and Cole's the holder. Carlson handles, like I said, place kicking, including kickoffs. DeAndre Carter, who once again I mentioned I'm a big fan of, is the current punt returner, and he and Trey Tucker are also battling it out for who's going to be the kick returner. So the quarterback situation has obviously shifted from 2020 when it was Derek Carr, and Carr was frankly backed up by not a great bunch of dudes. I guess Marcus Mariota was obviously a former second pick overall, and then the Peterman, Nathan Peterman of all people, was the third stringer. So I would say that it's sort of a wash at quarterback, but they've upgraded a bunch of positions. Jimmy Garoppolo has certainly looked good at times, but has always been in extremely quarterback-friendly situations and systems and surrounded by good surrounding talent. Brian Hoyer is sort of there as his old friend and, Dutch uncle maybe. I mean, he's, Goomba. I don't know if you want to go Italian since his name is Garoppolo. But, Hoyer is exactly what you think he is. He's, this close to being a quarterback's coach. Aiden O'Connell is a guy who's tall and awkward, but makes some big plays sometimes, which is a recipe maybe for someday developing into Nick Foles. I think his ceiling is probably closer to, maybe not quite Nick Foles, but it close. Maybe the Kyle Orton phase, if things work out for him. But like I said, they want. Hopefully nobody gets hurt. Garoppolo, of course, has had an injury history. There's a big drop off from him to their backups, and then Chase Garbers is a guy who might make the practice squad. So they need to stay healthy at quarterback. They've got a decent amount of talent at most positions. So this should be a team that wins a couple more games, but they've got some things to figure out even now at several positions. That's it for the Raiders, and I'll be moving on to the next team next.